By the year 910, Danish Vikings had occupied the entire eastern half of England, a territory known as the Danelaw. On August 5th, a joint army of West Saxons and Mercians cornered the Northumbrian Vikings at Tettenhall. The resulting slaughter annihilated the raiders and killed 3 of their kings. With the northern forces decimated, the Viking armies occupying the southern Danelaw were suddenly cut off from their primary source of reinforcements. This left them exposed to the 2 allied leaders positioned to exploit the gap, King Edward of Wessex and his sister Æthelflæd, Lady of the Mercians. Destroying an army in an open field requires a completely different type of warfare than uprooting a heavily entrenched occupying force. Tettenhall did not end the war. Instead, it acted as the catalyst that transitioned the Anglo-Saxon strategy from desperate territorial defense into a multi-year infrastructural siege. Decades earlier, their father Alfred the Great had constructed the Burhal system, a network of fortified settlements designed purely as safe havens against Viking raids. Edward and Æthelflæd inverted this defensive architecture. They weaponized infrastructure to project state power directly into hostile territory. They constructed offensive burhs. By planting heavy timber fortresses directly on enemy borders, they created permanent forward operating bases. Placing these static, heavy fortresses forced an attritional geographical war upon a Viking enemy that relied almost entirely on rapid hit-and-run mobility. The reconquest of the Danelaw would not be achieved through cavalry charges. It would be won through industrial-scale construction, relentless logistics, and slow geographic strangulation. The primary asymmetric advantage of the Viking forces was their shallow draft longships, which allowed them to navigate narrow rivers and bypass land armies entirely. To counter this, the Anglo-Saxons developed the twin burh, fortified fortresses on both riverbanks, connected by an impassable bridge. When a longship attempted to move upriver, it slammed into the blockade. The stalled ship was caught in a tactical trap, facing lethal crossfire from archers. This architectural innovation neutralized the Viking fleet. It trapped their armies inland, severing the primary supply lines needed to survive a siege. Between 911 and 917, the Siblings executed a highly synchronized campaign. Edward pushed east into Essex, constructing twin burhs at Hertford and Bedford. Simultaneously, Æthelflæd boxed in the hostile forces from the north, rapidly throwing up fortresses at Tamworth, Stafford, and Warwick. This creeping network of fortresses systematically isolated the 5 boroughs from one another, cutting off their ability to coordinate or trade. Executing this strategy carried an immense human cost. Thousands of conscripted workers labored in hostile territory, driving massive timber piles and excavating tons of earth. The siege phase culminated in the summer of 917, when Æthelflæd's forces successfully breached the defenses of Derby and captured the city. Derby's fall was the tipping point. It provided physical proof that the 5 boroughs could fall, validating the entire infrastructural strategy. The capture of Derby triggered an immediate collapse in Viking resistance. By early 918, the hostile army at Leicester surrendered to Æthelflæd without a single battle. Concurrently, the East Anglian Danes submitted to Edward's authority in the south. The logistical noose had worked flawlessly. The southern Danelaw was effectively dismantled. But at the absolute height of this military success, the campaign halted. On June 12, 918, Æthelflæd abruptly died. Her daughter, Ælfwine, briefly assumed command, taking the title as the second lady of the Mercians. Æthelflæd's sudden death transformed a triumphant military campaign into a fragile, high-stakes political crisis between 2 newly dominant allied states. In December 918, Edward executed a ruthless final maneuver. He deposed his niece Ælfwine, transported her to Wessex, and assumed absolute control over Mercia. This bloodless consolidation of power permanently stripped Mercia of its independence. This organizational chart illustrates the new command structure. The parallel administrations of Wessex and Mercia were merged. Reporting lines for Mercian ealdormen and garrisons were rerouted directly to the West Saxon king. The physical legacy of this campaign outlasted the immediate Viking threat. Looking at this surviving fortification embedded in the modern landscape, you can see the permanent grid of fortified urban centers left across the Midlands. The exact logistical grid built to defeat the Vikings, the interconnected roads, the taxation systems, and standing garrisons, was precisely the apparatus required to govern a unified territory. The Reconquest of the Danelaw functioned as a hostile corporate merger. By weaponizing the burh, Edward and Æthelflæd laid the exact administrative foundations required to build the Kingdom of England.